Hello, this is Markability with Paracontrarian. I've been thinking about how content creators can and are attacked today. I realize I need to share my thoughts on how we motivate what we're doing with Paracontrarian, and a lot of that is we need to understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve. And our approach is to come up with solutions that allow content creators to publish their work, direct traffic to their work, and monetize it, right? Without all of the above, what happens is this entire ecosystem for these contrarian, dissonant content creators falls apart. So in order to be self-sustaining, all of these things need to be done. So we are about solutions. But again, I think it's a good idea to take the time to look at what the problem is and show what motivates that and show what we need to be doing in order to solve it. We could spend a lot of time talking about who the bad guys are and what their motivations are, but the problem is that that's an answer that will change with time, and I want to make certain this is fairly evergreen, that you can come back to this for reference at a later time and it'll still be valid. It's always changing. Today, it's definitely the left that you've got to watch out for, because the left is very much in control right now. And although they are going to say that they're super tolerant and how you need to be super tolerant, they're also going to tell you to shut up because you don't agree with them. And they'll also accuse you of being influenced by X, Y, or Z. You know, you'll be your opinions will be accused of coming from a Russian source or something like that. The thing is that you need to take a look at what happens when the right's in power too. You're likely to see censorship then as well. And the right will say you're immoral, you're unpatriotic, and your thoughts don't fit their specific worldview. So if you believe that the right would never cancel you, then you're actually quite wrong about that. And there are some religious groups as well that will cancel you because you don't agree with them 100%. But the bottom line is that there's always somebody who wants a creator or some other dissident to be silenced because it's some sort of a threat to them, their agenda, their thought processes, and the way that they want people to see the world. They don't want you to think outside of a certain box. So what I'm going to talk about today in this video is an attack surface diagram that I created just in order to help me get my mind wrapped around the problem. And the term attack surface is one that's often used in cybersecurity. I'm kind of abusing it for my own purposes here because normally people will only talk about the digital domain when they're talking about an attack surface. And what I'm talking about here is actually every angle that something can be attacked from. So it's a larger picture than just the digital. It's also the physical, the political, etc. And we'll talk about tactics at a very broad level, but I'm going to try to cover the landscape of everything that's on here piece by piece, and then when I do, it'll make sense to you. Right now, it just looks like a big mess on the screen. So to start with, we will look at the individual. And by individual, I actually mean a physical person like you or me existing in the physical world, analog, if you will. Because you're talking about a living, breathing human being, of course, we are vulnerable to a number of different attacks. One of them would be, I just called it kinetic, and what I mean by that is you could be stabbed, you could be shot, you could have a bomb dropped on you, things like that. The next one is detention, where if somebody were to make the right accusations, you might be arrested and hauled away and put in jail. Detention would also include what happens if you get kidnapped. And the other thing is accusations. Your reputation can take a big hit if somebody makes false accusations against your character. Next step outward from individuals to consider the physical location. Now, obviously, because we're living, breathing human beings, we need to be somewhere at all times. And those locations are also vulnerable, number one, to doxing, and that somebody can give away your physical location, which can expose you to the harms that I just mentioned. And also that physical location may be subject to kinetic actions, meaning somebody could bomb it or destroy it in some other way. So the physical location is also susceptible to that sort of attack. Taking another step out, we can look at memberships and relationships. In a lot of ways, you might argue that they are the same thing. There is heavy overlap. When we talk about memberships, we're talking about your involvement with some sort of organization, and things that you will be vulnerable to with that are that you might be doxxed, meaning that you've got certain activities you're involved in, and perhaps you were doing these things in a way that was anonymous. Well, somebody can break that anonymity and harm your involvement with a certain membership group. Your reputation can be harmed by people making false claims, and also there can be infiltration into a membership group where we could have potentially agent provocateurs and such things could happen in order to mess with that membership because of your involvement as a dissident creator. And also your personal relationships. These are not as formal as these other memberships, but here's where doxing could get you in trouble, because you may have friends who don't know exactly everything you're doing or all the opinions you might express somewhere. And also, again, false accusations can attack your reputation and impact those relationships. Another important thing to look at is the employer. Now, keep in mind that most content creators do have jobs. They've got day jobs, because most of the time content creation isn't going to make enough money for you to be self-supporting. So you do have an employer, and because you are dealing with an organization, or even if it's just some individuals or even a sole proprietorship, they can still be worried about things like their reputation. They may have to bow to some political pressures. There may be mandates forced upon them by the state or others that force them to take certain actions. And also, if you're doxxed, that may have an effect on them, because it might, again, reach back and affect their reputation, because now people know that such and such individual actually works for them, and that could cause problems. Now, what can the employer do to you as an individual? Number of things can happen. In some cases, your HR department might decide they don't like what you're saying, what you're doing, what kind of information you're sharing with people, and you may get some re-education. And by that, I mean your HR department may well decide that you need some sensitivity training or some other sort of education in order to be a better person. And there's also the fact that when your employer knows what you're doing, they may use that to limit your career, deny promotions. You may even get demotions, reductions in salary rather than not just having the opportunity for increases. And you may also wind up being fired from your job. Now, the reason that we have employers is really that we're looking to make money, right? So if you look at a financial account that is usually held at a bank or a credit union, these folks are in a realm that is heavily regulated, and so they have to worry about things like their licensing. They have to have a state charter in order to operate. They may be ones to bow to political pressure because their licensing might be threatened. They may also wind up being subject to ESG scores in order to get investors, and they also have a reputation of their own to worry about. Now, ESG, I'll point out, ESG stands for environmental, social, and governmental. And what that means is this is actually a score which is created by the World Economic Forum, and this has been implemented by the folks at BlackRock as well as Vanguard. If you are looking for funding, you do have to have a good ESG score. And this is where you see companies acting in a very woke fashion, even though it angers their customers and they may even get boycotted over it. It's worth it to them to deal with that because they need to have a high enough ESG score in order to get capital funding. Now, because it's a financial account, it is possible that you can get robbed, and it's also possible that somebody can get your password and go in and pull money out of your account on you. But back to how the bank or credit union might react to some of the information on the left to you, it may result in freezing assets and debanking. For freezing assets, I'll point out what Trudeau did to truckers in that Ottawa convoy protest, and the Canadian government froze accounts of all these truckers in order to make certain that they could not spend money. And that made it really tough on their protest, being able to get fuel, food, things like that. And another thing that I can point out is Nigel Farage, who was debanked fairly recently. He's in the UK. He led the Brexit Party. He was very anti-EU, and he is very anti-establishment. And he's recently been kicked out of Coutts. I'm not sure exactly how that's pronounced, but that is an exclusive bank that royalty in the UK uses. And the powers that be are strong enough that basically the BBC lied about why he was kicked out of that bank and claimed it was because of his finances. But the truth has come to light, and records from Coutts show that it was about him being high profile, controversial, and a high-risk figure in their mind. And they also threw in some BS about him somehow being associated with Russia, which sounds like a wild accusation to me. Once Nigel Farage was debanked, he's had a hard time getting banked anywhere else. Another situation where somebody got debanked was Gab. Gab was debanked 3 or 4 times, depending on the source you look at, because they're a free speech platform and because they allow people that you and I may find despicable to speak. They had a hard time getting banked for that reason. And because people don't like the idea of free speech, they don't like a censorship-proof platform. And so Gab had a hard time getting a bank. Next thing to look at is how most content creators look to make money, and it's often to go to a centralized big tech platform and monetize their efforts on that platform. Again, these big tech platforms are organizations. They can bow to political pressure, ESG scores, reputation, boycotts, all the usual pressures applied as they do to any organization, and the things that they will try against content creators. One that popped up recently is re-education. YouTube now offers re-education if you want to undo a warning before you get your first strike on their channel. By re-educating you and making you a better person, you can then continue as though nothing ever happened. Demonetization may follow, where YouTube or others simply choose to make certain you don't make any money off their account. I'll point out in the situation with Russell Brand that YouTube continues to show his videos and run commercials in his videos, but he does not get the benefit of those commercials. There's also shadow banning that can take place, which means that your content is still on a platform, but is buried so nobody can see it. It's either removed entirely from people's feeds, or when you search for it, it's hard to find. And you can also be deplatformed, meaning that you and your content have been kicked entirely off of the platform. Now, let's talk more about Russell Brand. Russell Brand is a case where you've got somebody who is a dissident. He's very much against the status quo and very much against the establishment. There's no legal case being pursued against him. Just some accusations from 17 years ago, because we had people in the media who dug in and decided to go on a fishing expedition. And what do you know? They found something. YouTube's approach was to demonetize Russell Brand immediately. In other cases, other folks have taken a different approach, because X and Rumble were contacted by the UK government and asked to demonetize his efforts on their platforms, and they basically told the UK government to go pound sand, which is the right thing to do. However, keep this in mind. It's still a centralized big tech platform. If you think that they're always going to protect free speech, then you could very well be wrong about that. And when the right political pressure is applied, then you may well see a platform like X or Rumble actually do quite a bit to demonetize and to censor. When we talk about the accusations against Russell Brand, it reminds me of Cody Wilson in 2019. Cody Wilson is an individual who was running something called Defense Distributed, and they created the Ghost Runner, which is a home CNC machine for finishing 80% lowers, which would allow you to basically build a gun. He was also publishing information that showed people how to 3D print their own guns, basically plans for 3D guns or 3D printed guns. Just as he and Defense Distributor were making a name, accusations came out against him on the topic of statutory rape. Now, just like Russell Brand, you and I will never really know the answer to what really happened. However, as soon as somebody really becomes inconvenient for the regime, then people will find a way to silence them, and that's what happened to him. Something else to think about when it comes to legal issues. You may have never put yourself in a position like that. However, if you look at Harvey Silvergate's book from 2009 called 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent, that book makes the argument that the U.S. Code of Laws has so much in it that the average American has no idea that they're breaking the law and may actually be committing 3 felonies a day and not even be aware of it. Based on that, almost anybody can be convicted under the right circumstances. So anybody that thinks that these situations and issues don't apply to them is wrong. And also, everybody needs to look at what they can do to maximize their privacy. On that topic, let's work our way up from the individual, because everybody needs to be able to access the digital domain. Obviously, the first step, being that we're organic human beings, is that we need to go through some sort of computer or other device in order to access a network. And those devices, it doesn't matter whether it's a ghost in the shell, chip in your head, or a laptop, a desktop machine, or your cell phone. You have to use some sort of device, and all of these devices are susceptible to spyware, malware, and all kinds of different types of digital attacks. I'm not going to get into a whole lot of detail on that. Likewise, your router and LAN are susceptible to those same things. However, I would definitely influence folks and encourage folks to go buy your own router. Don't use whatever your ISP provides to you. There's no reason to use their router. You can set up your own LAN and then pass the information to their system. You don't need to be giving them access to the inside of your own network. It's very bad for privacy. If you're using their system, then you're definitely going to get a lot of extra monitoring for the extra money you're paying. From there, you have to use your ISP or some other means to get out into the internet, and that will be subject to monitoring by your ISP. They will be monitoring, and in many cases, they may actually report your activities to government agencies or to folks whose copyrights you may have violated and things like that. And I would definitely recommend that folks maximize their uses of VPN in order to minimize how much your ISP can actually tell about what you're doing. And then once you're out into the internet, you have access to almost everything else I'm talking about on this diagram. So let me continue. We talked about the problems with the centralized big tech platform already. Another approach that people will take is, well, hey, I've got this following. Hey, guys, come on over here. Let's all go use my own website where I can do what I want. However, the problem with that is that in most cases, your website is sitting on the server run by some host somewhere. And again, that host is probably some sort of organization susceptible to political pressure, reputation, ESG scores, etc. Because they're subject to those pressures, then it may force them to deplatform you and your website. They may decide they don't want to do business with you anymore. There are also other attacks that can happen while you're on that site, like denial of service. Because you've got some server, it's not a big tech platform. Somebody may be able to set up a team of bot machines that go and all try to hit the website at the same time, basically taking it down by denying access to anybody else. So that's another thing that can be done to you with a website. Gab had issues with their web hosting and had to go through multiple services for hosting. They kept getting shut down, denied, and axed. And where they wound up going was that eventually they wound up running their own servers, which was the only way that their system could function. Now, because people are getting most of their monetization from centralized big tech platforms, and that's all feeding into their financial accounts, sometimes you're going to have problems where you've been demonetized and you may have to go through a third-party monetization scheme where this arrow would come through here and then go down. And this third-party scheme may be something like Patreon. I saw people who got demonetized on YouTube set up Patreon accounts so that people could sponsor them another way. Another thing that falls into this category is crowdfunding sites. And when we look at crowdfunding, it's the same sort of thing. You are looking for another way to make money instead of going to get your monetization off some big tech site. Now, threats in this area, because these third-party monetization things are organizations, right? And they're subject to all the same pressures and hassles that anybody else would be. It could result in you being demonetized or deplatformed. And one example is where GoFundMe had collected $7.8 million in funds, and this was to be sent to the truckers in Ottawa, Canada, who were protesting recently. And the Canadian government worked with third parties, including GoFundMe, to freeze their funds, and so they could not receive that $7.8 million in funding that would have been useful for things like fuel and food and that sort of thing. Another case is Patreon, who I mentioned a minute ago. And what you'll find is not only do they get external pressures, but they also have agendas of their own. And Patreon has been pretty bad in the past at demonetizing and deplatforming people that disagree with their agenda. Jordan Peterson made it a point to drop them proactively when he understood what their actions look like. Another thing is that even if you've got a third-party monetization system set up, there's still payment processors, and oftentimes this will be the credit card companies, Visa, MasterCard, Stripe, etc. And this is also a category that includes things such as PayPal. And quite often, these folks will have their own agendas. They're also subject to a lot of these external influences. And one example is Operation Choke Point, which was a U.S. government effort that was put in place to shut down perfectly legal businesses, which included gun sellers or gun accessory sellers. And this Operation Choke Point is a pretty egregious abuse of power, obviously, but it's just one way that external pressures might be applied to keep you from actually receiving money from your efforts. The other thing I really want to point out while we're talking about this are decentralized networks. Now, in a lot of cases, I've pointed to things where you've got an organization, they're subject to a lot of external forces, and they also tend to have their own agendas. And if you look at that and you look at something like a decentralized network, you get rid of a lot of those problems immediately, because you've got a wide variety of people involved. You've got all these nodes that I'm showing in here. It could be hundreds of thousands of nodes in some cases. And it's tougher for them to all align an agenda. And it's also a fact that they do not have a headquarters that some government agency can come raid, and it's not something where somebody can easily go and sue the organization that runs it. So these truly decentralized systems have some real positives that way, and I'll give a couple examples. One is Bitcoin, and the same is true of quite a few other cryptocurrencies. One problem with Bitcoin is that you do not have privacy on that system. People do blockchain analysis in order to figure out which public keys belong to whom, and once that's done, you can see every transaction that somebody has done on the Bitcoin blockchain. You know their current funds, you know their current balance, and you know everybody that they've done business with. That's a problem. And so there are other cryptocurrencies that are more privacy oriented, such as Monero, Pirate Chain and others. And then another type of decentralized network is one for just posting your information. I recently did a video showing how to set up a node on IPFS, which is the Interplanetary File System. That again is a decentralized network. There's no headquarters. Once you've posted information to that and other people pick up the information and repost it, what happens is that basically that information can't be taken down. However, if you don't have it spread across a lot of platforms yet, what can happen is that somebody can go into that system, they can find out your IP address, and they can use that to go after you for the content that you're sharing. So there are issues with that system. However, think of it as a piece of infrastructure that can be built upon. There can be privacy layers layered on top of what IPFS does today. So not to worry. And again, like Bitcoin, people fork Bitcoin and come up with new solutions all the time. And there are ways to get around these things. So just because something's decentralized, don't assume that it's private. However, decentralized platforms can do a lot to solve a lot of the problems that I've talked about today. Now, I've given you a pretty quick overview of everything that's in this landscape that I drew up the other day. There are probably quite a few things I'm missing, honestly. This is my first shot, let's call this version 1.0 of the paracontrarian attack surface. And what I want to do is continue to update this over time. So if you've got ideas, things that I've forgotten, or things I just plain have wrong, please go ahead and put something in the comments on the Substack site in order to let me know. And let me see, I've given you an overview of what the attack surface for a content creator looks like. And the same attack surface really applies mostly to most folks who are consuming that content as well, and potentially others beyond that. So please let me know your thoughts, give me your comments, and I hope that we can speak again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.